The little girl whispered, "I'll never walk again, will I?" And the night shift nurse, who once grew up in foster care herself, placed the only doll she had ever kept into the child's hands. That night, a small gift reached the heart of a father who had forgotten how to love. The pediatric rehabilitation wing at UCLA Medical Center was nearly silent. At this hour, the only sounds were the gentle rhythm of IV drips and the occasional squeak of sneakers from the night shift staff. Overhead, the fluorescent lights buzzed quietly, casting a pale, bluish glow that seemed to blur the edges of everything: walls, windows, even time itself. Room 214 sat at the far end of the corridor, a quiet pocket untouched by the noise of day. Inside, a 7-year-old girl lay motionless beneath a thin hospital blanket, her wide eyes locked on the ceiling tiles above her bed. Grace Miller rolled her chair closer, careful not to startle the child. She was holding a worn clipboard labeled "Patient, Lila Reed, age 7, spinal injury from fall, in physical therapy." 2 months earlier, Lila had fallen from the top of the climbing ropes during recess at school. The drop had fractured 2 lumbar vertebrae, leaving her temporarily unable to walk. Surgeons had repaired the damage, but recovery was slow and uncertain. The physical pain was manageable. The emotional toll was not. Lila rarely spoke. She avoided eye contact, resisted touch, and curled into herself whenever a nurse came too close. Tonight, though, she was awake. Still. Tense. Grace settled beside her, keeping her voice gentle. "Can't sleep?" Lila didn't answer. Then, after a long pause, her voice came in a fragile whisper. "I'm never going to walk again. I already know." Grace felt the air tighten in her lungs. Not because of the question, but because she had once asked the same thing. At age 5, in a hospital room like this one, she had whispered into the dark, "Will anyone be here when I wake up?" No one had answered. Grace reached down and unzipped the faded backpack tucked beneath her chair. She pushed aside her spare sweater, a granola bar, and a medical notebook. From the very bottom, wrapped in an old cotton handkerchief, she retrieved a small cloth doll. The doll was hand-stitched, worn at the edges, with frayed yarn hair and a single button eye. The blue dress was faded, but its crooked hem still held the memory of someone's careful hands. "My mom gave me this," Grace said quietly. "The night before one of my surgeries. She told me, 'As long as you're holding her, you'll have courage.'" Lila turned her head, just slightly. "I kept her through a lot," Grace went on. "Foster homes, long nights, scary moments when I didn't think I could keep going." She looked at the doll again, then at the girl lying before her. "She helped me. Maybe she could help you too." Grace extended the doll slowly, like an offering from one survivor to another. Lila hesitated. Then her small hands reached out, trembling only slightly, and took the doll. "Does she keep secrets?" the girl asked in a whisper. Grace smiled, her voice catching. "Always." Lila looked down at the doll for a long moment. Then, in silence, she wrapped her arms around it and pulled it close to her chest. Grace stayed seated, watching quietly as the child's shoulders relaxed, as the lines of tension around her mouth softened. And finally, miraculously, Lila closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed, not with the help of medication or machines, just a doll, just trust, just love. What Grace didn't see, what she couldn't have known, was that someone had been watching. Across the hallway, just outside the glass wall, Logan Reed stood frozen. He hadn't meant to spy. He had only come for a quick visit, to check on Lila before trying to sleep. But when he approached the room, he saw a nurse kneeling beside his daughter's bed. Quiet, attentive, wholly present. He saw his child, who hadn't let anyone near her in weeks, clutching a doll and breathing with something like peace. And he saw something in the nurse's hands that gave him pause. The way she held that doll, the care with which she gave it away. Not like an object, like a piece of herself. Logan's phone buzzed in his pocket, a reminder about an early call with a development team in Seoul. He didn't reach for it. Instead, he kept his eyes on the figure behind the glass, the woman who had done what no amount of money, specialists, or private care plans had managed to do. She'd stayed. She'd knelt. She'd given something that couldn't be bought. And his daughter was sleeping. Later, as dawn broke gently across the Los Angeles skyline, Grace sat alone in the staff lounge, hands wrapped around a cooling cup of ginger tea. Her body ached from long hours, but something in her chest felt light, unfamiliar. She reached for her backpack and touched the empty space where the doll had rested for more than 2 decades. It felt strange. Not wrong. Just different. She looked toward the ceiling and spoke quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "Mom, I think she needed her more than I do." Just beyond the doorway, Logan passed by. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the words landed anyway. He stopped. He didn't speak. He didn't step in. He simply stood there. A man who had spent years building walls of logic and structure, now disarmed by a moment of quiet surrender. And in that instant, something in him shifted. So small it was almost imperceptible, but real. The kind of shift that begins not with answers, but with presence. By 8 o'clock a.m., the pediatric rehab floor was humming with quiet movement. Breakfast trays rolled in. PT assistants began their morning routines. The aroma of institutional oatmeal mixed with faint antiseptic, strangely comforting in a place where days blurred into one another. Logan Reed stood near the espresso cart in the first-floor lobby, fingers wrapped around a coffee cup he hadn't taken a sip from. He had barely slept, and his mind replayed the image of Lila curled around that old cloth doll again and again. He had watched children sleep before, his own daughter especially. But something was different this time. Not in her body, but in the space around her. She looked safe, and he hadn't done that. A nurse had. No, not just a nurse. A stranger. One he hadn't even hired. He pulled out his phone and tapped into the staff log, swiping through overnight shift rosters until he found her. Grace Miller, pediatric rehab assistant, night shift, part-time. Part-time. He frowned. That wasn't enough. He didn't want part-time for someone who could coax peace into his daughter's sleep like that. He took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter, burned, typical hospital brew, and turned toward the elevators. Grace hadn't gone home. She'd stayed past her shift again, charting progress notes at the corner desk near the nurse's station. Her scrub top had a tiny smear of marker from helping one of the other kids earlier draw butterflies in their therapy journal. She was bone-tired, but her chest was lighter than it had been in months. Lila hadn't just taken the doll, she had held it. And Grace had seen something in the girl's face as she drifted to sleep. Not surrender, not fear. Something else. Hope. "Grace Miller?" a voice said behind her. She turned. A tall man in a pressed navy shirt and dark jeans stood just outside the station. His expression was calm, but his eyes betrayed something deeper. Exhaustion masked as control. She knew who he was immediately. Lila's father. She stood, surprised. Yes? He stepped forward and extended his hand. Logan Reed, Lila's dad. His handshake was firm, warm, professional, but not cold. I wanted to thank you for last night. Grace tilted her head. Oh, of course. She had a rough evening, She hasn't let anyone that close in weeks, he said, cutting gently across her humility. And I've seen every therapist on the West Coast try. Grace offered a small, careful smile. Sometimes kids don't need therapy. They need permission to feel safe. Logan nodded once, slowly, as if the words were unfamiliar to him but not untrue. There was a pause, not awkward, just quiet. Then he asked, "Was the doll yours?" Grace hesitated, then nodded. Yes, since I was 5. Another pause. And you gave it away? I think she needed it more than I did. She didn't say it to impress him. There was no theatrical tone, just calm honesty, the kind forged in years of making do with very little. Logan looked at her as if she were something he didn't quite understand and didn't want to underestimate. He cleared his throat. Would you consider moving to the day shift? Grace blinked. Excuse me? I'd like to make sure Lila sees you more often, if that's something you'd be open to. I can speak to your department head. Grace's body stiffened, not from offense, but from instinct. She had learned long ago that offers came with strings, and powerful men rarely asked. They arranged. I appreciate that, she said, measured, but I stay on nights for a reason. He tilted his head, curious. What reason? I work mornings at a community clinic in East LA. Free pediatric checkups, volunteer staff. His brow lifted, and a touch of humility surfaced behind his businessman exterior. I didn't realize. Grace offered a quiet shrug. Most people don't. That's kind of the point. For a moment, Logan had no reply. Then he did something that surprised them both. He smiled. It wasn't rehearsed or media polished. It was small, real. I'm glad she has you, he said, even if it's only at night. Grace met his eyes for the first time and saw something behind them that softened her posture. Grief. Not loud, not bleeding, but deep, contained, and tightly managed. She saw it because she knew it. Me too, she whispered. That evening, Logan returned home to his Pasadena estate. The housekeeper had already turned on the ambient lights in the hallway and laid out Lila's favorite pajamas, though she wasn't due back until Friday. He walked past the living room, empty. Past the office, still pristine. Into the master bedroom. He stopped at the edge of the bed and sat down heavily, fingers tracing the corner of the comforter. On the nightstand sat a photo. Lila, age 5, laughing in a backyard wading pool. Her mother's hands visible at the edges of the frame, steadying her. Logan turned the frame face down and stared at the blank wood surface for a long time. Then, for reasons he couldn't explain, he opened the drawer and pulled out his tablet. He found the hospital volunteer site Grace had mentioned. He clicked through the listings. Then he bookmarked the page. Back at the hospital, Lila stirred in her sleep. Her arm was still loosely wrapped around the doll, her fingers curled against the worn fabric like it was an anchor. Grace sat a few feet away, not watching, just present. She didn't know about Logan's visit to the website. She didn't know that her name had started a quiet shift in a man who hadn't felt anything stir in his heart in 2 years. She only knew that one child, just one, had chosen to hold on. And for tonight, that was enough. Logan Reed had built his entire life on numbers. Growth percentages, burn rates, market forecasts, risk-reward ratios. He didn't believe in instincts. He trusted data. Success was a matter of structure, systems, control. And yet, none of that had helped him understand why his 7-year-old daughter had clung to a ragged cloth doll from a stranger, or why, for the first time in weeks, she'd slept through the night. He had replayed that image 100 times. Lila's small hands curled around the doll, her lips parted in peaceful sleep. He wanted to quantify it, replicate it. But there was no formula. There was only Grace Miller. By midweek, Logan was back at the hospital. This time, not as the silent observer, but with a plan. He stood in the pediatric lounge, reading over a printout of Grace's schedule he'd quietly requested from the administrative assistant. She was set to clock in again that evening. He didn't want to make it awkward. He just wanted to understand. Maybe even offer something helpful. He was used to offering help, with results, with outcomes. He didn't know how to simply be there. And so, like any CEO who didn't know what to say, he started with the language he knew: logistics. Grace arrived for her shift around 6:40 p.m., still in her faded gray sneakers and burgundy scrubs. She was tying back her hair in the break room when Logan knocked gently on the doorframe. "Evening." She turned, surprised but not startled. "Mr. Reed." He stepped in. "I hope I'm not intruding." She gave a cautious half-smile. "Depends. Are you here to ask me to switch to day shift again?" That earned the smallest of laughs from him. "No, I learned my lesson." He held out a coffee, her order from the cafe downstairs. Black, a dash of cinnamon, no sugar, the same she'd gotten every night from the hospital kiosk. "You remembered," she said, accepting the cup. "I take pride in paying attention." There was a pause. Something tender, vulnerable, hung in the air between them, unspoken. Then he said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What was your recovery like?" She blinked. "Recovery?" "You mentioned once surgeries, foster care. I don't want to pry, but Lila's struggling, and I don't always know how to help her." Grace took a slow breath. She wasn't used to parents asking that kind of question. Most wanted outcomes, not origin stories. "I had scoliosis when I was a kid," she said finally. "It got bad. There were years when I wore a brace nearly full-time and 2 major surgeries by the time I was 12. He nodded slowly, listening, not interrupting. "I was already in foster care by then, moved around a lot. Not many people stuck around long enough to learn my pain scale." She looked down at the cup in her hands. "But there was one nurse. She brought me a doll she said used to be hers. She told me, 'She's soft, because life isn't.' I never forgot that." Logan looked at her like she was saying something profound in a language he had only just begun to understand. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Don't be," Grace replied. "It's why I do what I do." There was something solid in her voice. Not bitterness, not even sorrow. Purpose. He wanted to stay in that moment longer, but he felt the old tug of time, efficiency, control. He looked down at his watch and said, "I have to make a few calls." Grace nodded, unbothered. But as he stepped out of the room, she called after him. Logan? He turned. She's not broken. She's rebuilding. He didn't answer, not out loud. But something in his expression shifted, like a blueprint redrawn in real time. That night, Grace entered room 214 to find Lila already waiting, doll in hand, eyes brighter than before. "Hi," Lila said, her voice just above a whisper. Grace smiled. "Hi, back." The therapy journal lay open on the tray next to her, pages filled with uneven, colorful scribbles, and something new, drawings. A girl with long brown hair holding a doll, another with a tall man watching from the hallway. "You drew me," Grace said softly. "And Daddy," Lila added. Grace sat beside her. "He loves you, you know." Lila looked down. "He works a lot. He works hard for you. That's a kind of love, too. But I think he's learning how to show it in other ways." Lila nodded like she didn't quite believe it yet, but maybe she wanted to. Then, "Do you think I'll walk again?" Grace hesitated, not because she doubted it, but because hope required care, precision. "I think your body is learning, and your heart is too. Sometimes the heart has to believe before the legs can try." Lila didn't answer. She just squeezed the doll tighter, and Grace sat beside her, not filling the silence. Upstairs in the hospital's rooftop garden, Logan stood alone. The city stretched below him, Pasadena glowing in quiet dignity beneath a violet sky. He should have been on a conference call. Instead, he stood with both hands in his pockets, thinking of a little girl and a nurse who had changed everything without trying to. He pulled out his phone, opened his email, and then, almost impulsively, deleted 3 unread messages. He exhaled. For a man who measured everything, he was learning that not all healing could be tracked. Some healing had to be trusted. The Thursday morning light filtered gently through the narrow hospital windows, casting long rectangles of sun across the floor of room 214. Grace had left hours earlier, but her presence lingered, like warmth in a seat just vacated. Lila was awake, and she was drawing, not aimlessly, not scribbling the way she had in the first few weeks post-surgery, but with quiet intention. Her small fingers clutched a purple crayon, tongue pressed lightly to the corner of her lip as she focused on a page in her journal. The drawing showed a girl in a hospital bed, a small figure beside her, brown hair tied back, wearing scrubs, and above them both, a name written in big, careful block letters. Hope. Logan stepped into the doorway just as she was finishing the final E. He didn't speak. He'd learned that startling Lila out of concentration often made her withdraw again. Instead, he just watched, quietly, leaning one shoulder against the doorframe. "Good morning," he said eventually. Lila looked up, startled, but didn't close the book. That was new. "Hi, Daddy." He walked over, crouched beside her bed. "You drew something?" She hesitated for a moment, then turned the journal toward him. His eyes scanned the page. He didn't understand children's art very well. It had always been Amanda, his late wife, who deciphered clouds that were really elephants and stick figures with superhero names. But even Logan could see this wasn't just a drawing. It was a declaration. "She's Hope?" he asked gently, pointing to the nurse figure. Lila shook her head. "No. That's Grace, but I call her Hope." "Why?" "Because when she's here, the room feels like when the sun comes back after rain." Logan blinked. He'd never heard Lila describe anything that way before. "Did she teach you to draw like this?" "No. I taught myself." He looked at the sketch again. the way the lines held hands. The tiny details, bandages drawn carefully on the figure's knees, the doll tucked under one arm. "Do you want to show it to her?" Lila hesitated, then nodded. Later that afternoon, Logan did something entirely unfamiliar to him. He returned to the hospital, not for business, not even to see a doctor, just to deliver a drawing. Grace had just ended a physical therapy session with a 5-year-old with cerebral palsy when Logan appeared outside the door. She looked surprised, but not cold. He held out a folded page, carefully protected in a plastic sleeve. "She wanted you to have this," he said. "She said, 'Your name is Hope.'" Grace took it slowly, eyes scanning the lines, the color, the shaky block letters. Her fingers lingered on the doll. "That's the first time a child's ever drawn me," she said softly. Logan tilted his head. "She didn't just draw you. She renamed you." There was silence between them, one filled not with distance, but with weight. He cleared his throat. "You've made an impression. One I couldn't buy with the best specialists in the country." Grace looked up from the picture. "She doesn't need a specialist right now. She needs someone who doesn't leave." He didn't flinch, but his jaw tightened slightly. That night, back at his home, Logan sat alone at the long oak dining table. It had once been filled with laughter. Amanda's cooking, Lila's chatter, the occasional burnt toast moment that Amanda made feel like a victory. Now, the table echoed every small movement. He had taken Grace's words home with him. Let them sit. Let them bruise. She needs someone who doesn't leave. Logan had never intended to leave, but grief had taught him absence didn't require departure. It could come quietly, through distraction, silence, distance dressed as duty. And now his daughter had given someone else a name that should have been his to earn. Hope. It wasn't jealousy he felt. It was something else. Longing. At the hospital, Lila fell asleep with the doll tucked under one arm, and her open journal resting on her lap. A new drawing had begun on the next page. This time, 3 figures. The girl in the bed, the woman in scrubs, and a man, taller than the others, standing close but not quite touching. Over their heads, she had written, "Us." It was called the Young Voices of Recovery Showcase, a modest event held every quarter in the medical center's lecture auditorium. Children from the pediatric wards would share their drawings, stories, or short performances. Parents and staff attended. There were fold-out chairs and juice boxes. Laughter came in spurts, soft but real. Grace hadn't planned to go. She usually slipped out quietly before events like this, letting the day shift staff take over. But this time, Lila had drawn something new. A picture of the hospital's rooftop, with 3 people under a sky full of stars. This time, Logan was holding their hands, and beneath it, in big uneven handwriting, "My name is Lila, and I'm getting better." Grace had found it beside the doll that morning. No words, no request, just the page, waiting. So she stayed. She helped Lila dress, purple corduroy overalls, her favorite shirt with sparkly hearts. Grace braided her hair carefully, slow and gentle. "You don't have to share it if you get nervous," Grace said. "Just sitting and listening is brave, too." Lila gave a tiny smile. "I want to." The auditorium filled gradually. Families squeezed together. Nurses helped children into seats. IV poles gently rolled beside them. There was applause for each tiny presenter. A boy in a wheelchair who recited a poem, a girl who sang 2 lines of a lullaby before whispering, "That's enough." And then came Lila. Her name was read from a clipboard. She rolled herself on stage in a hospital chair, Grace by her side. She held her drawing in both hands like it was a treasure. Grace adjusted the microphone for her. But before she could step away, a sharp voice echoed from the side of the stage. "Excuse me, who gave her permission to assist a presenter?" Heads turned. Dr. Halberstam, administrative chief of rehab. He wasn't unkind, just clinical, obsessed with protocol, uncomfortable with emotional mess. Grace froze. "I wasn't," she began. "You are not assigned to this shift. You are not credentialed for public presentation support. Please step aside." Lila's hands trembled. The room quieted. Grace looked at Logan in the front row, suddenly unsure. But before she could move, Lila gripped her hand. "She's with me," the girl said, voice small but steady. "I need her." Gasps. A few nurses clapped quietly. Halberstam opened his mouth to speak again, but Logan was already on his feet. "Dr. Halberstam," he said with a calm sharpness that silenced the room, "sit down." The audience turned. "This child is in recovery. That is the purpose of this event. Grace has been central to that recovery, with or without your paperwork." The doctor's face flushed. "Mr. Reed, I understand your concerns, but there are people who heal with their hearts, doctor, and there are those who hide behind clipboards." Logan's voice didn't rise. It tightened. "Let the child speak." Halberstam sat down, jaw clenched. Grace squeezed Lila's hand. "You ready?" she whispered. Lila nodded. Then she held up the drawing. "This is the rooftop. It's my favorite place. I can't walk yet, but I go there in my dreams. And I go with Grace and Daddy." She looked at Logan and smiled shyly. "Sometimes we don't get better from medicine. We get better from not feeling alone." Silence. Then applause. Soft at first, then swelling. A standing ovation, though no one quite knew why. Something sacred had just happened, and everyone had felt it. Backstage, after the event, Logan found Grace alone near the curtain, folding Lila's blanket. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked up. "For what?" "For not standing up sooner." She shook her head. "You stood up exactly when it mattered." He hesitated, then added, "You don't have to work nights forever. I could—" She held up a hand gently. "I'm not asking for anything, Logan." "I know. That's why I want to give something." Her eyes softened. "Then keep showing up. That's all she's ever wanted." Logan looked down at his hands, at the cuff of his tailored shirt now wrinkled from where Lila had hugged him before her speech. "I was afraid I didn't know how," he admitted. Grace smiled. "You're already doing it." That night, Lila was asleep by 8:15, the doll beneath her pillow once more. Her journal was open again on the tray. On the page, a drawing of the auditorium, the crowd, the applause, and in the front row, one man standing with both hands over his heart. Above the picture, she wrote only 2 words. He stayed. The days that followed the auditorium storm felt strangely quiet, as if the hospital itself were catching its breath. Grace went back to her night shifts. Logan returned to his office in downtown Los Angeles, but something had changed, subtly but profoundly. He kept his phone volume on high now, just in case a call came from the hospital. He found himself reading more of Lila's therapy notes. Not scanning. Reading. And at night, instead of conference calls, he sat in her room while she slept. Sometimes in the corner. Sometimes beside her. Sometimes just outside the door. She never said a word about it, but she left the door open. It was a Thursday afternoon when Logan received the email. Subject: Acquisition proposal from Ardent International. Confidential. He read it once, then twice. A buyout offer. Generous. More than generous. They weren't just interested in his company's product line. They wanted the whole thing: infrastructure, patents, personnel, the team he'd built over a decade. It would mean freedom. It would also mean stepping away. He stared at the screen. Lila's drawings were still pinned to the wall beside his desk, one of the rooftop, one of the auditorium, and a new one from just yesterday. It was of 3 people sitting on a park bench. The caption read, "When we're together, the sky feels closer." He leaned back, eyes closed, fingers steepled. How do you measure the cost of stepping out of your own life? That same evening, Grace sat on the hospital balcony outside the staff break room. The sun was low, painting the sky in soft orange and indigo. She cradled a chipped mug of tea, thinking of Lila's voice at the showcase. That quiet strength, the way the little girl had looked at her, like she belonged. But that was the problem. She didn't. Grace had always known her place. She was a night shift rehab assistant, a former foster kid with no degree, no pedigree. Just stories and soft hands. Lila deserved more than someone who'd never known stability. And Logan? He had an empire at his feet. A world that moved when he spoke. She couldn't imagine a place in it for someone like her. So when a volunteer coordinator at the East LA clinic told her about a scholarship for a full-time pediatric therapy program, tuition covered, starting in Oregon, Grace hesitated. Only for a second. Then she said, "Send me the details." Back in room 214, Lila was drawing again. She sketched the rooftop, but this time, only 2 figures stood there, her and Grace. The third, her father, was on the ground below, looking up, briefcase in hand. Lila stared at it for a long time. Then she flipped the page. She didn't want to finish that one. The next morning, Grace entered the room to find Logan already there, helping Lila with her breakfast tray. "I didn't know you were coming early," she said. "I didn't either," he admitted. But she asked. Lila grinned with jam on her cheek. "I told him he needs to learn how to butter toast without making it soggy." Grace laughed. "That's an advanced skill." Logan smiled, but Grace noticed the weariness in his eyes. "Everything okay?" she asked when Lila turned back to her cereal. He nodded, then hesitated. "I got an offer." "For the company?" He nodded again. "And are you going to take it?" "I don't know." Their eyes met. "Do you want to?" "I thought I did. Now I'm not sure." Grace looked down at Lila, happily humming as she stirred too much sugar into her milk. Sometimes the life you're meant to build doesn't look anything like the one you planned. Logan looked at her with something unreadable in his expression. And that's when Lila looked up. "Are you going away?" The question hung in the air. Both adults froze. "Why would you say that?" Grace asked gently. Lila shrugged. "You both look like you have secrets." Logan cleared his throat. "I'm not going anywhere. Grace hesitated, then said the same, but Lila wasn't convinced. That night, Grace pulled the scholarship email back up. Her fingers hovered over the reply button. One click. That's all it would take to change her future. But whose future would she be walking away from? Logan, meanwhile, stood once again on the hospital rooftop. The city sparkled beneath him. He pulled out his phone. A draft email sat open. I accept the offer. His thumb hovered. Then he slowly tapped. Delete. Below, in room 214, Lila fell asleep with the doll cradled under her chin. Her journal was open. One sentence on the fresh page. Sometimes grown-ups whisper louder than they talk. The rain came that morning like a hush over Pasadena. Gentle, steady, washing the city in soft light and softer sounds. Hospital windows steamed slightly as nurses moved through their routines. The corridors smelled of antiseptic and wet umbrellas. In room 214, Lila sat upright in bed, fully awake before sunrise. Her doll lay neatly beside her, the blanket folded just so. Grace hadn't even arrived yet, but Lila had already put on her therapy socks. Because today, she wanted to try standing. No one had asked her to. No one had promised it would work. But something had shifted inside her. She was ready. And that changed everything. Logan arrived early, soaked from the dash in the rain, his collar damp, tie forgotten. He paused at the door and saw his daughter, not just waiting for life to happen, but reaching for it. She wasn't curled up with the doll today. She was holding on to the bed rail, knuckles white, arms trembling. "Morning," he said gently, stepping in. She didn't look up. "I'm gonna do it," she whispered. He crouched beside her. "Do what?" "Stand." Logan's breath caught. "Grace said I could try when I was ready." "And are you?" She nodded. "I'm not scared anymore. Just wobbly." He almost laughed. Then realized he was tearing up. He swallowed hard. "Do you want help?" "I want her." Grace, who entered just in time to hear it, froze in the doorway. Her heart caught in her throat. For all her doubts, for all her fears that she didn't belong, this small voice had just reminded her that she did. "I'm here," Grace said, moving toward her slowly, calmly, like she'd done 100 times with other children. But never quite like this. Lila looked between them. "Daddy, you too." Logan moved to her other side. It was a small thing. 3 people around a bed, a set of trembling legs. But what happened next would stay with all of them for the rest of their lives. Grace placed a steady hand at Lila's back. Logan, unsure, gently held her forearm. "On 3, Grace whispered. 1, 2, 3. Lila grunted, teeth clenched, eyes shut, and rose. Just an inch. Then another. Her legs shook. Her arms trembled. But she stood, both feet, no braces, no walker, just for 3 full seconds. And then she collapsed back into their arms, gasping and laughing and crying all at once. Grace caught her. Logan steadied her. Lila looked up, eyes shining. "I did it." "Yes," Grace said, her voice cracking. "You did." And for the first time in months, since before the fall that fractured more than her spine, Lila Reed felt taller than her pain. The news spread fast. Nurses whispered excitedly. The physical therapist who'd thought she'd need weeks more of assistive prep smiled wide when he heard. Lila was already writing about it in her journal, drawing herself standing, drawing Grace and Logan holding each hand, drawing the doll with a smile stitched on its tiny face. "Her name is Hope," she wrote again. "But also Grace. But also me." That evening, Logan walked Grace to the parking garage. It wasn't raining anymore, but everything still smelled like earth and beginnings. "I don't know what to say," he said softly. "You don't have to say anything." "I want to." She stopped beside her car, turned to face him. "Thank you," he said, "for being the one who believed she could get up before anyone else did, including me." Grace smiled, but it was tight, fragile. "There's something I need to tell you." He nodded. She took a breath. "I got offered a scholarship. In Oregon. Pediatric therapy certification. Starts in 6 weeks." His face didn't change, but his body went still. "I haven't accepted," she added quickly. "But I thought you should know." He looked at the pavement, then at her. "She'll miss you." "I'll miss her." He didn't say, "I'll miss you too." But his silence said enough. "You should take it," he said finally. She blinked. "What?" "You've given her the strength to stand. Maybe now it's time you stood for your own life." Grace wanted to cry, or argue, or run, but instead she whispered, "You make it very hard to walk away." He smiled faintly. "That's the point." Later that night, Lila asked a question she had never dared to ask before. "Daddy?" "Yeah?" "If Miss Grace goes to Oregon, will I be okay?" He looked at her. And this time he didn't hedge. He didn't distract. He said the truth. "You'll be okay because she helped you believe you could be." Lila nodded slowly, then whispered, "Can we write her letters?" "Every week." "And send her pictures?" "Every day if you want." "Will you miss her?" Logan smiled sadly. "I already do." In her apartment that night, Grace lay in bed holding the doll that had started it all. She looked out the window at the moon above the city and whispered into the dark, "One step at a time." The walls of room 214 looked different now, not because of new posters or brighter lights, but because they were no longer a place of recovery. They were a place of memory. 2 more weeks passed. Lila stood on her own 3 times. She learned to walk with parallel bars. She even took 5 independent steps last Thursday. The doctors smiled, the nurses cheered, but Lila didn't. Because the stronger her legs got, the heavier her heart became. Grace was leaving. She hadn't packed yet. But the departure already hung in the air like a thunderstorm just beyond the hills, and no one seemed willing to say it out loud. Logan noticed the change first. Lila became quieter. She stopped drawing. The doll, once clutched in her arms at night, now sat untouched on the shelf. When he asked what was wrong, she would shrug. He thought it might be nerves about school or walking again in public. But when he found her crying alone in the therapy room, he knew. "She's going," she whispered. "I know. Why can't we ask her to stay?" Logan knelt beside her. "Because we love her. And love doesn't trap people." Lila sniffled. "What if she forgets me?" "She won't." "But what if I forget her?" He pulled her into his arms. Then I'll remind you, every single day. Grace, for her part, was unraveling in private. She smiled through sessions. She laughed with nurses. She wrote her Oregon acceptance email late at night, then read it 3 times before hitting send. She kept the goodbye light. I'll be back to visit. I'll send postcards. I'll zoom in for the holidays. But none of those words soothed the hollow in her chest, because deep down, Grace knew this wasn't just goodbye to a child. It was goodbye to the first time she'd felt chosen. And that was harder than anything she'd faced in all her years of growing up unchosen. Two days before her departure, Lila surprised everyone. She asked to go to the rooftop, not wheeled up, not carried, walked, slowly, painfully, but with dignity. Grace stayed beside her the whole way. Logan followed a few steps behind. When they reached the top, Lila looked up at the stars just beginning to appear. I always imagined this place, she said. Now it's real. She turned to Grace. I made something. From her pocket, Lila pulled a folded piece of paper. Inside, a drawing of the 3 of them on this rooftop, stars overhead, hands joined. But this time, the caption said, The people we love don't leave. They live in the places they helped us reach. Grace couldn't speak. She just pulled Lila into a hug and held her there, forehead to forehead. I don't want to say goodbye, Lila whispered. You don't have to, Grace said, because goodbye is just one word. But what we've built, that's forever. The next day, Grace stood in front of her tiny apartment closet, suitcase open, folded scrubs inside. She stared at the doll on her dresser, the one she'd carried since she was a girl in foster care, the same doll she'd once given to Lila. But Lila had returned it to her that morning, placed it in her lap, whispering, You need her now. She picked it up gently. Then, on impulse, pulled out a sewing kit and needle. She opened a small seam at the base of the doll and carefully slid in a folded note. You made me believe love could stay. She stitched it shut. Soft, neat. Then zipped her suitcase and stared at the city outside. Logan offered to drive her to Union Station. She didn't argue. The ride was quiet at first, rain tapping against the windshield, the soft hum of traffic on wet roads. Thank you, he said suddenly. She turned. For what? For giving her back to me, not just her legs, but her light. Grace looked down. She gave it to herself. I just stood close enough to catch the sparks. A long silence followed. I wish I could ask you to stay, he said softly. She didn't respond right away. Then, but you won't. He shook his head. Not because I don't want to, but because I finally understand. Loving someone means letting them go build what they were meant to build. Grace turned her head, tears in her eyes. Then why does it hurt like this? Because it's real. At the train station, the goodbyes were quiet. Lila wasn't there. She had a therapy session Grace insisted she not miss. So Grace handed Logan a small envelope. Give this to her tonight. He nodded. Will I see you again? He asked. Grace smiled faintly. You already do. She stepped onto the train and didn't look back. That evening, Logan sat beside Lila's bed and gave her the envelope. Inside, a simple drawing of two girls. One was Lila, the other had Grace's smile. They stood beside a tree under a golden sun. On the back, in Grace's handwriting, "Keep standing. I'll be right here wherever you go." Autumn turned the edges of Pasadena golden. School buses returned to their roots. Halloween decorations appeared on porches, and room 214, once filled with the hum of IV pumps and whispered encouragement, now stood quiet, its walls freshly painted for the next child's journey. But Lila didn't need it anymore. She walked into her own classroom now, braces on her legs, a quiet determination in her spine. Her steps were slow, but they were hers, and every child in the hallway parted to let her pass like she was royalty. She didn't brag, didn't draw attention, but she wrote letters, every Friday, to Oregon. Dear Miss Grace, I learned how to climb stairs with only one railing today. I cried after. Not because I was scared, but because I felt like you were standing at the top, waiting for me. Are you making new friends? Are the kids nice? Do you get to use crayons in therapy school? Daddy still can't cook toast, right? But he reads me your letters at night, and I think he misses your voice. I do too. Love, Lila. Grace read each letter on the park bench outside the therapy center in Portland. Her campus was small but filled with color and noise. Children laughing, students practicing puppet therapy. A therapy dog named Otis who loved to steal Leff's shoes. But nothing filled the space Lila had left. Still, the letters helped. They reminded her that love could travel, that influence didn't end at the county line. Grace began writing back, not just in words, but with sketches, pressed leaves from Oregon forests, and stories about the children she was now helping. She even mailed a picture of Otis wearing a bow tie. Logan kept all the letters in a carved wooden box on Lila's bookshelf. He read them out loud, even when she was fully capable of reading herself, because the sound of Grace's words in his voice healed something between them both. But Logan had his own rituals, too. At night, after Lila fell asleep, he'd walk the garden behind their house, checking on the tomatoes Grace had helped them plant before she left. They hadn't grown right. Too much sun, not enough water. But one night, weeks into October, he found a single ripe tomato, round, firm, glowing red in the moonlight. He picked it, held it in his palm, and whispered, she was right. Meanwhile, Lila had begun keeping a second journal. Not drawings this time, but words. Short essays, little memories. She wrote about her hospital room, the rooftop stars, the doll beneath her pillow. She wrote about pain, about hope, and about Grace. At school, her teacher noticed. Have you ever thought about entering a writing contest? She asked. Lila shook her head. I just write to remember. The teacher smiled. That's exactly why people need to read it. That weekend, Logan found her typing at his laptop, face scrunched in focus. What are you working on? She tilted the screen toward him. A story titled, The Girl Who Walked and the Woman Who Believed. He sat beside her, reading quietly. Halfway through, he had to stop. Did I get it wrong? Lila asked. He shook his head. You got it perfect. She leaned her head on his arm. I think Grace would be proud. She already is. In Oregon, Grace opened the latest letter to find a story enclosed, typed neatly, pages numbered. At the bottom of the first page, submitted to the California Young Writers Festival. She read it twice, then cried. Because this wasn't just a letter. It was legacy. Proof that presence could echo long after absence. That love, once planted right, could bloom in words, in courage, in the quiet steps of a girl who once thought she'd never stand again. One rainy evening in Portland, Grace sat at her small desk, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and began writing. Dear Lila, I read your story today, and I cried the whole way through. Not because I was sad, but because I saw myself in your words. You've become the girl I once dreamed of being. Brave, kind, honest. You said I helped you walk. But Lila, it was you who helped me stay standing in a world I had nearly given up on. No matter where I go, I carry you with me. And I always will. Love always. Grace. She folded it carefully, slid it into an envelope along with a dried maple leaf from campus, and added one more note in pen beneath the seal. Sometimes the goodbye isn't the end. It's just the space before we find our way back. The winter sun settled gently over Pasadena, casting long golden stripes through the tall windows of the elementary school auditorium. The air buzzed with the sounds of folding chairs, violin tuning, whispered programs, and the muffled chaos of children dressed too nicely for comfort. It was the day of the Young Writers Festival showcase, and Lila Reed, 7 years old, former spinal patient, full-time spark of light, was on the program. Category, Memoir. Title, The Girl Who Walked and the Woman Who Believed. Logan sat in the second row, sharply dressed in a blue sweater Lila had picked for him. He held his phone carefully, ready to record. But his hand trembled, not from nerves, from hope. He scanned the crowd. The seats beside him were empty. She hadn't written back this time. No RSVP, no call. He didn't blame her. Oregon was far. Her new life was full. That was the point, wasn't it? He turned back to the stage just as the teacher stepped up to the mic. Our next speaker, she said, has written something very close to her heart, and I believe close to all of ours. Please welcome Lila Reed. Applause, then silence. Lila stepped slowly across the stage. No braces, no cane, just slow, quiet, independent steps. And somewhere in the back of the auditorium, a young woman placed a hand over her heart and whispered, "She's walking." Grace had arrived unnoticed, slipping in through the side door just moments before Lila's name was called. She had debated coming at all. But when she read the final version of Lila's story online, the one that won her the top prize in her age group, she couldn't stay away. Not from this, not from her. She hadn't told Logan, hadn't warned Lila, because some reunions didn't need an invitation, only timing. And this was the moment. Lila reached the podium. She adjusted the mic, looked out at the crowd, then found her father's eyes and smiled. Then she began. When I fell, I thought it was the end of walking, and maybe the end of me. I didn't like the quiet. I didn't like the fear. And then a nurse came in. She didn't wear a white coat. She didn't talk like a doctor. She told me her name was Grace, and she gave me a doll. But really, she gave me herself. She believed I could walk again before I believed it. She stayed when it was hard. She held my hand when I shook. And when I stood, she stood with me. When she left, I thought I was losing something. But I was wrong. She had given me something I could never lose. Strength. And now I write. Because that's how I keep her voice inside me. Because she taught me that stories help us walk, even when we're scared. The auditorium sat in silence. Then came the applause, long, rising, full-bodied. Lila bowed, stepped back from the mic, and walked off stage with quiet pride. Only then did she see her. Grace. Standing near the exit, hands pressed together, eyes full. Lila froze. Then she ran. Full tilt. No cane. No hesitation. Straight into Grace's arms. They held each other tightly. No words. No need. Logan made his way toward them, smiling, chest tight, eyes burning. "You didn't tell me," he said when he reached them. Grace pulled back. "I wasn't sure I could." "And now?" She looked between him and Lila. "Now I know I couldn't stay away." Lila grinned. "You came for me." "I never really left," Grace whispered. That evening, the three of them sat on the rooftop of the hospital where it all began. Lila leaned against Logan's shoulder. Grace sat on her other side, the doll tucked between them. Stars blinked above, and no one spoke. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything that needed to be said was already here. In the silence, in the presence, in the love that had stitched their lives back together. Epilogue. 1 year later, Grace moved back to California. She accepted a position as the lead pediatric rehab therapist at UCLA Medical Center. She lives 5 blocks from Logan and Lila. Every Friday night, they have dinner together. Homemade toast, which Logan still can't perfect, pasta, laughter, and letters read aloud from the box where all of Lila's writings are kept. The doll still sits on Lila's shelf, sometimes under her pillow, sometimes in her backpack, and sometimes in Grace's hands, on hard days or quiet nights. Just to remind them both, love, when given freely, always finds its way home.